pillars. Oops. You could identify 3 pillars of social cohesion: codependency, communication, and trust. And they all are critical. It's not that one of them is more important than the other. Obviously, we cannot all get along. It's not happening. So there are always jerks. There are always people who are just maybe don't have mental capacity to live in modern society. But a healthy society can handle this without much trouble. But what is more important that, as we know from history, we cannot get along all the time. There are times when a society breaks down. And if you attended my another presentation about political dynamics and the future of the democracy, we talked a lot about theories regarding what's causing these breakdowns, about models, and so on. But today we'll focus on a more practical question. Can it be that this election year will be one of these times when a society breaks down? And before going further, we have to talk about something else that we rarely talk about, is war and peace. And this is the next slide. And since I'm assistant modeler, you would be surprised if I would not put at least one state transition diagram. So this is here on the next slide that I still don't see. Okay, here it is. So you could think about peace and war as 2 different states. And each of the states is relatively stable, but each of them has its distinct logic. For the logic of peace, the goal is to solve problems peacefully by following shared rules. And this, the existence of rules that we all agreed with, this is important. And violence is considered unacceptable and immoral, with very few exceptions, like if this is in self-defense, or if this is a limited violence by the police to maintain the law and order. But mostly it's not acceptable. The problem is that if even a minority resorts to violence, the logic of peace can fail. And this is shown by this arrow on the left, that violence or aggression can break the logic of peace and transition to the state of war, which has a very different logic. And many people are confused about this fact that the logic of peace and the logic of war are very different. If you're already at war, the goal is to win. And if you want to peace, the main way to achieve this is by defeating an aggressor. And for this, violence is acceptable and even desirable when this is against the enemy. And there are still some rules of war, for instance, Geneva Conventions, but they are very limited and generally not easily enforceable. So apparently we are now still in state of peace. But the question is how stable this peace is right now. Goldstone and Turchin looked into this. They developed a model that they called it structural demographic model. And a good thing about this model was that it included some parameters that could be estimated from some statistical data. And they tried to apply this model to American society. And what they found is this. Our model shows there is plenty of dangerous tinder piled up, and any spark could generate an inferno. And this is from the article published 4 years ago, even before the elections. They did not know yet who would win. But if you read this article now, you would see that this was prescient. They predicted that the events like January 6th would be possible and so on. Anyway, the question is that if there is such a possibility, what can we do to prevent it? So could you please, Scott, to get to next slide? So this is the critical question: how to prevent a civil war? And to me, this question sounds familiar because I still don't see the slide 3, and I need a slide 4. Scott, if you could. This question sounds familiar to me because I am working for NASA's Aviation Systems Division, and the major research topic is how can we prevent collisions between aircraft. And there are many parallels between these two questions, so fasten your seatbelts. What you see on this picture is what we call a near-mid-air collision. When two aircraft are coming as close to each other as they are not supposed to. So there is a quantitative criteria for this, but that's details. So near-mid-air collisions, so NMACs as we call them, we love acronyms at NASA. They are exceedingly rare. The probability is 1 to billion per flight hour. So if you do the math, you will find that you can spend your whole life flying on airplanes, and you will never ever be any close to this danger. So aviation now is very safe, but it was not always safe. Thousands researchers, engineers, and public officials worked tirelessly to make this so safe and continue to work to keep it so safe. And this is one lesson already for us, that if probability of something bad is so low, this does not happen by itself. It does not happen automatically. People have to make some efforts for this. And also the question is what probability is not so low when we have to start to worry. Probably we don't have to worry about a collision between airplanes because they are so rare, but still some people are afraid to fly. This is not rational, but who told you that people are rational? But anyway, imagine if the probability of near-mid-air collision were about, say, 5%. Would you agree to fly? I guess you would not. You probably would take a train or maybe stay at home. You would consider it too high, right? And we don't have a reliable way, or actually any way, to estimate the probability of a civil war. But apparently it's more than 1 to billion. Could it be 5%? Could be maybe less. Could be more. We don't know. But I hope that it's still relatively remote. But this does not mean that we should not do anything about this. This means that now it's the time to do something to make this probability even lower. because if it was already imminent, then it would be probably too late to do anything about this. So maybe we should not lose our sleep about this, but we still have to think about what can we do. As people in aviation are doing, they are thinking proactively about how to prevent these collisions. And an important point here that this another aircraft that we call an intruder, it's not your enemy. It's not trying intentionally to hit you. It's not a dogfight. We are talking about civil aviation here. And the main cause of NMAX is human error. And you could ask, why do you have these human errors? Well, because humans make errors. And that's our thing. And besides that, flying aircraft is damn hard. You have to pay attention to so many different things all at once, and it's so easy to overlook something. And so the answer that was found in aviation, how to reduce the chance of these bad accidents, this is called separation assurance, but for unmanned aircraft, for drones, it's called detect and avoid, but it's kind of the same idea. So the first part of this is situational awareness. So just to help pilots and air traffic controllers to look around and to see what is going on when the danger is still remote and it's easy to avoid. And a lot of automation actually goes into this situational awareness. Then an important thing about this, that this is mostly cooperative, as we call it. And in big aviation, it's almost entirely cooperative. That is that it relies on communication with other aircraft and with air traffic control. And it helps most of the time. But as the last resort, there are systems that help pilots avoid an imminent collision. This is what we call an NMAC. These are called collision avoidance systems. And this is the last resort. They could compel pilots to do something extreme that the pilots usually do. And the pilots are trained to trust these systems. So these collision avoidance systems, they practically never fail. But still, collisions could happen because sometimes pilots just don't pay attention or ignore them. And not all aircraft is equipped with these systems. But anyway, mostly it works. So let's try to follow this approach and first start with situational awareness and try to look around us and to find whether we see any dangerous maybe ideologies or political movements that could bring us closer to violence or to a civil war. So the next 4 flights are about this, about those who are flirting with the logic of war. Although we still have peace, the war is very remote. But there are still some people who are flirting with the logic of war just to achieve their political goals. And this is similar to remember, like another aircraft is not trying to hit us. These people don't necessarily mean to hurt or to kill other people. Of course, there could be selfish people, but this does not mean that they necessarily want to hurt us. And moreover, there are people with noble goals and intentions, but remember about human error. So they could overlook maybe some dangers from the means that they employed to achieve their goals. They may not think all this through carefully, and the outcomes could be pretty dangerous. So, Scott, could you please bring slide 5? Okay, so first let's look at progressive left. And this is where I was pretty heavily involved before the pandemics. So I kind of could rely to some degree to my personal experience from this. And this is not about the progressive movement as a whole, but about what we could see is one ideology that is popular in this movement, which is called critical race theory, although it's really not critical, not race, and not even theory. But this is a textbook of the road to hell paved with good intentions. And intentions behind this are really good. So it seeks to elevate people from all kinds of oppression. So it's like Marxism on steroids. So Marxism was mostly concerned with economic oppression or exploitation, but this is like an extension of this. But the problem here is that for economic oppression, you could find a clear criteria what it is. It could be related to your role in division of labor, to relationship to properties and capital, and so on. But for other kinds of oppression, this is not so easy to do. And so the approach that CRT chose was from dividing all people between these different broad groups that are considered, some of these groups are considered as oppressors and some as oppressed. So it goes contrary to liberal ideas because it assumes collective rather than individual guilt and responsibility. And the problem with this approach is that if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So once you see the world through the lens of eternal war between oppressors and oppressed, then you could see oppression everywhere. So if you belong to the group that designated as oppressors, even if you did not do anything wrong and did not oppress anyone, you still are considered as a bad guy. And if you belong to the oppressed, you're the good guy, no matter what you do personally. And why I said that this is not a theory, because the defining feature of any scientific theory is that it should be falsifiable. So it should be possible if you find the evidence that contradicts to this theory, that the theory could be disproved or it should be adjusted. And this is not the case for critical race theory, because all criticism of it, and there is a lot of criticism, is dismissed as an evidence of latent racism. And there are some pretty troubling outcomes from adopting this approach, which are listed here. But one interesting feature of this, that they have some affinity with socialist countries like Cuba and Venezuela. And why? Because they saw them as they fought against oppression. And they completely overlook the fact that their current governments are the worst oppressors, probably, than those who they fought against. And another controversial aspect of this, that the proponents of CRT are saying that it is not taught at schools, which technically is correct because it's pretty complicated for schools. But it provides a theoretical basis for ethnic studies, and especially for so-called liberated ethnic studies. And it was a very controversial topic recently in California, in particular. This liberated ethnic studies curriculum was rejected several times at the state level. And still the proponents of it are trying to inject it in some school boards and individual schools. So it's still controversial. And why it was controversial? Because it pits different groups of people against each other. It's very divisive. It's anti-Semitic, and it even could justify violence if this is for the right cause against oppressors, of course. For instance, they elevated people like Angela Davis, if you heard about her, against Martin Luther King. So the violent means against non-violent or peaceful means. So anyway, this is what we could see on the left. And now let's look to the right. And this is slide 6. And what we see on the right is a predictable backlash against this, which is known now as Make America Great Again, or MAGA movement. But of course, a backlash against CRT is only a part of this. But it's not easy to explain by any single factor. But a big part of this was resentment against too fast change and growing diversity, which by itself they could be good things, but when they're happening too fast, many people feel uneasy. And this is a common phenomenon related to human psychology. It's just not something specifically American. And we see this conservative backlash in other countries as well. And CRT was just a part of this. So CRT did not create this trend to grow in diversity, but it promoted it and justified it. But another part of this is cultural and economic anxiety. So if you read a book, Strangers in Their Own Land, that described it very well, and it has racist, xenophobic, and also anti-Semitic overtones. And the defining feature of this MAGA movement is a cult of a strong leader, which is Donald Trump, who is considered as a counterbalance against liberal, quote unquote, but in fact illiberal ideas like CRT. And what it has similar to CRT, that it's immune to inoculated from any criticism. So all accusations against the leader are rejected as a witch hunt. So the leader seems invincible. And another interesting feature of this is that affinity with dictators, such as Putin. And you may remember that Putin tried to interfere in our elections in 2016. It's debatable how successful it was, but the attempts was definitely there. And this is probably mutual. So Trump also likes Putin. And from our main concern standpoint, that if CRT justified violence in theory, but during Trump's presidency and even after that, we could see violence in action. So you could remember Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, and there were other episodes like this. And of course, the events of January 6th of 2021, when we possibly narrowly avoided a civil war. So here we see another danger. But now let's look to the left again. Scott, could you bring the next slide, 7? And maybe not very surprising that we could see a progressive backlash against this. That in big part was triggered by indivisible resistance to Trump. And I also was involved in this, so I have some personal experience with this. But the other triggers were Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter protests. So it is still progressive. So it still supports some good progressive ideas like universal health care, affordable housing, and clean energy, and other climate mitigation efforts. And this all good, and this was what attracted me to participate in all this. And it looked, some of these ideas looked entirely within reach several years ago. For instance, Medicare for All, it was supported by 50% of Republicans. And the others, Democrats and Independent, the level of support, of course, was higher. But the problem is that this progressive movement failed to build broad coalition around these ideas that are not really partisan. And now it does not even try to build this coalition. So it makes this increasingly partisan. And in addition to this, it supported increasingly controversial policies like defunding the police, and open borders, and so on. And I want to make clear that this is not a position of Democratic Party as a whole. This is only a position of a part of extreme part of its left wing. And much of the party does not agree with these policies. And Biden himself rejected them. He said that, no, we did not want to defund the police. And in some Democratic primaries, candidates who ran on these ideas, they lost the elections. So it's not where the party stands, but this is where the extreme left wing of the party stands. But then it propagated to more mainstream and even outside the Democratic Party in the form of so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion. And there is a lot of discussion and a lot of controversies around this. And I don't have time to get into this. But this is a big business right now. It's more than 3 billion market in the United States alone, and about the same in several other countries. But controversy around this is because it's not what it said. Again, what you would have against diversity or against inclusion? Probably they would see them as positive things, right? But how they understood in this DEI framework that diversity does not mean diversity of opinions. What they call equity, it's not equality, it's something different. And inclusion is not really inclusion. It is limited only to marginal groups, as they call them. But who they consider as the oppressors, they are not welcome. And if people disagree with some of their ideas, they are not welcome as well. So, not surprisingly, DEI fully embraces this illiberal critical race theory and even pushing it to extremes. And you could know about this cancel culture, about how they tried to cancel events that did not fit events or individuals who did not fit the ideology. And interestingly, here we have affinity with international terrorists, such as Iran and its proxies, including Hamas. And this affinity, again, seems to be mutual. Because, for instance, some groups are organizing this so-called pro-Palestinian protests. They are known to have links to terrorist Palestinian organizations. And they are even groomed and instructed to some degree by these organizations what to do. This is not widely known, but there is enough evidence for this. And what we see now, that violence is further normalized. You could hear about Antifa. BLM protests, most of them were peaceful, but not all of them. Some people got killed. And I mentioned about these pro-Palestinian protesters that called to bring Intifada to America. So this is incitement of violence. This is not even covered by free speech laws. So, and now another look to the right. This is on the next slide. And what we see there is conservative backlash on steroids, which is a second coming of Trump. And this is kind of surprising because why would Trump be so popular? He lost elections, right? And there were many other candidates in Republican primaries. Why Trump is again? Again, I would not pretend that I know and I can explain all secrets of his popularity. But my take is that it's mostly not because what he is for, but because what he is against. And he is against DEI, he is against pro-Palestinian protests, which he portrays as liberals destroying the country. So never mind that these protests have little to do with liberals. He is against Iran and its proxies, and against uncontrolled immigration. So he is really against some things that are really unpopular. And unpopular not even among Americans, but even among Democrats. But say Biden cannot afford to alienate the left wing of his own party. So he is kind of restrained in expression his disagreement with these views, although he is expressing it occasionally. But Trump has no restraints. He is talking openly about this. And he lies a lot, of course. But for many people who also don't agree with these things, they see Trump as their guy. So he channels like their disagreements. But of course, there is more in this, definitely. But you could think, okay, so we already had Trump as a president. He was not the best president, but like, nothing terribly bad happened. So even if Trump wins again, we probably could survive it. Well, maybe we could. But this time Trump can be more dangerous. First, you probably, there was another forum recently about Project 2025. So many of you may be familiar with this. So this is the idea to quickly replace many officials in executive branch with Trump's loyalists. So it's practically hijacking democracy. And Trump himself is trying to distance him from this project, but the chance that he will embrace it probably pretty high. Then losing this time is not an option for him because of criminal charges against him. Although the last decision by Supreme Court could provide some immunity for him, but still he would rather prefer not to risk. And the Proud Boys who participated in some episodes of pro-Trump violence, they are back and standing by. And they are now more decentralized. We don't know much about them. They don't like to communicate with the media. We don't know their plans. We don't know their tactics. But again, there is little doubt that if Trump calls them to fight for him, probably they would. But what we have to remember, though, that the Proud Boys, although, as I said, we don't know their numbers, but still, these are thousands. They are not millions. And most of Trump supporters probably would not support violence. Maybe many of them would be against violence. So we should not think necessarily that Trump supporters are all violent and they all want a civil war. So again, the parallel with aviation. They don't necessarily want to hit us. But still, Scott, could you please switch to next slide? Still, even in this case, there is a risk maybe that a civil war can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is a legitimate question. So these things could happen. And there is even a movie with this title, Civil War, which I did not watch. I don't know if I will. It's on Netflix. But this is now on people's minds. And is it a good thing that this is so much on people's minds, or is it a dangerous thing? So I can recommend this article, Civil War Movie Reactions, Can This Really Happen in America? It's a very good article. And this article makes some excellent points. For instance, it says that we can discuss our concerns while seeing the downsides to being overly pessimistic and highly certain. But the main takeaway from this article is the main answer to this question: what can we do? What can we do to prevent a civil war? We all play a role in building a less toxic and more stable America. We can demand less contemptuous and polarizing behaviors from our leaders, activists, and people in the media. This is the main answer, but for the next few slides, I'd like to throw in a couple of ideas that just to start a conversation. And the ideas that mostly are intended to prove that there are things that we can do, that are possible. How effective they are, that's a different question, but they are possible. Scott, could you switch, please, slide 10? The main idea is that what it amounts to is to building a broad coalition for peace and democracy. And this is similar to what happened during a progressive era a century earlier, when there was also a very broad coalition, very broad and very inclusive coalition, inclusive in a good sense, not in a sense of DI. And today this coalition would include Republicans who don't support Trump, and even many of Trump's supporters who are rejecting political extremism and violence. Democrats, liberal Democrats who don't support liberal CRT and DI ideology, and progressives who support DI goals but reject political extremism and violence. And plus pragmatic non-partisans who are unhappy with both parties. And according to current polls, more than 40% of Americans identify as non-partisans, against something about 30 Democrats and Republicans. So we have more non-partisans in our country than partisans. And that's the reality that still it has to sink in. Then another important point that no matter where we are politically, we have to distance ourselves from political extremists. And this even includes political extremists from our own party. And some of us recently read the book, The Tyranny of Minority, that also made the same point, that each party has to come more strongly against its own illiberal extremists than against extremists from another party. And we are not good in this, frankly. But we should not view people who are maybe fighting for the same goals that we share but embracing violence. We should not consider them as our allies. And if they resort to violence, we have to call the police and not the militants from opposite side. Because this is how civil wars start. When paramilitaries from opposite sides start to fight. We have to try to avoid this. And also, well, if this comes to near-mid collision or an analog of this in politics, we have to be ready for non-violent mass actions when and where they could protect democracy. And this non-violent and when and where, these are the keywords. Because we should not stage, say, counter protest against MAGA thugs where they want us to be in order to start fighting. And by the way, Proud Boys' tactics is that they don't start fighting. They provoke the other side to start fighting, and then they fight. So we should not respond to this provocation. We should choose the place and time for these mass actions, which would be most impactful. And again, it's another point in which I just happen to have some personal experience. When there was this mass resistance in Russia in August 1991 against Yanaev's attempt to reinstall the Orthodox communist ruling. This attempt, this coup, it failed in 3 days, in August 1991. And there was this mass non-violent actions, plural, against it, mostly in 2 major cities in Russia. In Moscow, of course, in St. Petersburg, and in Yekaterinburg. And this is where I lived. And I was there. On that square where it was the largest demonstration that I ever saw in my life. It was about 100,000 people in a not so big square. And remember, 1991, before the internet, before smartphones. And it took 2 days, less than 2 days, to organize this mass resistance. So it's mostly the word of mouth. And it worked. This Janaev's junta, it did not survive it. So these non-violent mass actions, if they are done right, they could be effective. There is no guarantee that they would be effective every time, of course. But it would be a good idea to be prepared for them. And could you, Scott, bring the next slide, 11? So another idea is that it's now time to talk about politics. And many people are uneasy about this, which is understandable because if you have an uncle or a brother or a friend who supports Trump and you don't support Trump, and if you try to discuss it, well, probably your relationships would be screwed. And many people experience it. But there is the wrong ways to talk about politics, and there is the right way to talk about politics. And this right way is based on what is known as Socratic dialogue. And this is known for 25 centuries. It's not a new idea. And all that we recently learned about human psychology, it corroborates these recommendations. And using this, you can win practically any argument and improve relationships with your partner at the same time. But of course, you need. It's important to understand what winning is, because if you are wrong about the issue and your partner is right about this issue, and you convince your partner to agree with you, this is not a winning to me. You both are losing. You are getting further from the truth. But if winning is moving closer to the truth together with your partner, then yes, it's possible 9 times out of 10 at least. But for this, you also should not be afraid to change your opinion or to admit that you don't have an opinion for the moment, and accept that you may not know the whole truth. And you probably know this metaphor shown here about blind man and an elephant. And if you think about this, an elephant is a very strange beast. So it's very big. It has this trunk. So it's unusual even for not for blind men. It's difficult to make sense of this. But most of the issues that we are discussing, these political issues, social, economic issues, they are much bigger than an elephant and much stranger. That's why they are called the wicked problems. And so if you believe that you are right about any of these problems, you're probably wrong. You can see only one side, one aspect of this. But you need to talk to other people who see them from different angles to understand it better. And the less you push, the more you get, because we are wired for reciprocity. So if you are more humble, then your partner would appreciate it. And the other things that are pretty common, but listed on this slide. But the most important thing that you have to be curious and ask questions. Not just talk what you think, but understand what your partner thinks and why. And listen carefully and ask more questions. And this way, the chances are that you can find common ground in at least in something, and then expand it as much as you can. And I'm approaching to the end, but a few more slides. So, Scott, could you please get the next one? So again, as we could see in aviation, that communication is critical. And there are many organizations and a growing number of organizations who are working exactly on this, on restoring communication and trust. And they are listed here, and you are welcome to explore them. And again, I have personal experience that it can work. For instance, last year there was a trustworthy elections campaign organized by Brave Angels, which sponsored many workshops with equal numbers of red and blue participants, and I participated in several of them. And we produced a report that you could find at this trustworthy elections campaign, with many good ideas that Democrats and Republicans agreed. And the main point of this was that we all want to make voting easy and cheating hard. And we also had many workshops and one-to-one conversations about even more contentious issues, about Palestine. And again, we could find the points of agreement. And the main idea behind them that this common position is pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian, against Hamas and against the war. So these things are not mutually exclusive. They actually support each other. So this is a couple of examples, and the next slide, I forgot what is the next slide, Scott. Okay. So there are also multiple organizations that are working on developing common political agenda, and some of these organizations are actually open for you to contribute, to participate in this. For instance, Fix US, they have the solutions landscape document, this Google Doc, and they ask for comments and suggestions. Common Sense American are doing something different, but also they provide the options to participate. And Forward Party, it's the party that developed its political agenda, which has some pretty good plans. Well, Scott, you probably missed a couple of slides. And no, you did not miss, but you just no, you did. Okay, so please go back. No, it's slide 13. And there are also organizations that actually work on implement this common non-partisan agenda, again listed here. And we can focus on most impactful reforms. So we all have a limited bandwidth and limited time. So it makes sense to devote it to push for reforms that are easier to implement and that provide the key to unlock many other reforms. And again, I can recommend you this book, The Politics Industry, which makes this point that among these reforms, open primaries with top 5 candidates advancing to general elections. This is very similar to our system in California, but we have top 2 candidates. But top 5 candidates would be better. And this would allow to use ranked choice voting to select among this top 5 the candidates who have the most appeal, irrespective of their political affiliation. And this is already done in Alaska, and several more states are trying to implement this. So this seems something pretty practical. And the last slide, I believe, after this, not the last, but the next. So another thing that we can do is to find and vote for pragmatic common ground candidates, which is difficult to be a common ground candidate right now in such polarized political environment, but still possible. We still have some. For instance, there is Problem Solvers Caucus in our Congress. Forward Party endorsed quite a few candidates like this. And in California, you can look at Common Ground scorecard in California that also scores all these different officials on this Common Ground, how much they want and can reach across the aisle. And a couple of examples, which are very different, although they both happen to be Democrats, not surprising for California. Sam Liccardo, who is running for to replace Anna Eshoo, basically, who was a major of San Jose several years ago, and reached out to people who disagreed with him to find common ground. And a progressive Democrat, Rock Hanna, who also walked across the aisle on many issues. So that's a few ideas just to start a discussion. And the next slide, I believe, would be the first slide for your ideas. Because my ideas were intended just as a conversation starter. But I'd like to see it kind of brainstorming, so that please bring your ideas here, and I'll try to update the slides in real time. You will not see this in real time, but by a link in chat, you can see them in real time. But that's what I will try to do. Thank you,
Michael. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I want to thank you for the presentation. So, are there any suggestions?
Or questions or comments, whatever, but suggestions are especially welcome.
Yeah, I don't have a definite suggestion. I was noticing when you were talking, you mentioned avoiding demonstrations that are not peaceful, and you've got to kind of watch out for a large demonstration. There are a lot of things going on there that you might not be aware of. Carl, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, anyway, I want to let you know I really appreciate the balance in your talk, Michael. And you've got a lot of good suggestions already. I think it's going to be hard to get many more of them. Maybe you're talking about more like what the humanist community can do. And that's a little tricky.
Or what can we do in California specifically?
Yeah. And again, I'm not much for engage. Oh, shoot. I'm afraid I'm going to have to go, but I'll keep watching for a little while. Thank you.
So, Michael, what do you think of the idea of just running for office yourself, maybe on a third party, as a third party candidate? You know, even if you don't win, it gives you a chance to talk to the people and get some ideas across.
You mean me?
You or anyone watching this presentation.
Anyone, I agree. If you have these qualities that that are important to run for office, please run for office. Yes. But for me personally, well, you know me. I am a nerd. I am not a people's person. It's not that kind of stuff from which like the politicians are made. So.
Okay, Oded.
Yeah, Mike, I have a question. Do you consider influence of China and Russia on the election, on the situation right here in America? Because they have lots of interest to change it in favor of their policies. Are we protected from them?
I do, and I am very worried about this. And we don't know yet what is going on. We did not know for a while what was going on in 2016. And when we do, it could be too late.
It'd be too late.
But I am sure that Putin would be happy to meddle in our elections. Chinese probably, I don't know what are their preferences regarding our politics, but they maybe could meddle against Trump. I don't see how they see Trump. Really, that's a good question.
Because we have to protect, if you remember, previously we found out that Russia was really very active in creating in the election before.
Yes, yes.
And they're probably doing it right now. But if you don't know that we do something against it or protect the people to aware of this website or whatever, I think we just support the Russians.
Yes, that's the whole can of worms. What can we do to prevent this interference through the media, through the internet? So it's a lot of Russian bots, for instance, ran during 2016. So they posed as individuals, as real people, and they injected some very polarizing fake news using Trump's words. And they just try to stoke this discontent and anger. And they were probably successful. in this. What I heard from security experts, that the chances that they would interfere directly with election systems like databases or vote counting election machines, this chance is pretty low, but they don't need to. If they sway enough people to vote in a certain way or not to vote, depending on what they want, they could be enough. But how to counteract this, I don't have the answers.
Can the CIA figure out where is the source of information that's been fed to our media to make sure that other sources of information are okay? Not the Russians, it's also the Chinese.
So, Oda, this is your suggestion, right? To have due diligence in trying to know what is the source of any information on the web, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good point. Okay, let me put it here.
It does seem that there's something about the news industry these days. It's just dramatic. And it's economic reasons for that. Zem.
Yeah. Hey, Michael. Interesting talk. I have a couple of thoughts. The reaching across the aisle, it sounds good, but it is not an end in itself. You do not reach across the aisle in order to reach out across the aisle. You'll notice that even in our polarized environment, things get done sometimes. For instance, the Senate recently passed legislation, having to do with buttressing nuclear power in this country. It passed by a vote of 98-2. One of the nays was, of course, Bernie Sanders, because he always knows what's up. I forget who the other guy was, but it was almost unanimous, right? Most funding for Israel is done with high bipartisan margins of support. Of course, we have an ongoing discussion as to why that is. But it is. It happens, right? So I think there has to be some level of respect given to our differences and that they are legitimate. You can't say, oh, you stop fighting two kids here. Come over and sit down and talk it over. That's not always true in life. Like, should Hamas sit down with Bibi Netanyahu and talk things over, or would you reach across the aisle that way? I mean, sometimes you can't. And I think of the abortion issue, for example. My personal view is that the baby, when it's born and takes its first breath, it becomes a human, and that's when a clock starts ticking. That is my view, and therefore I am against any restrictions on abortion by the state. But someone else will come along and say, well, I believe that life begins at conception, or I believe that life begins when heartbeat can be detected, right? I don't agree with it, but I respect the value. I respect that point of view, right? And so, how do we reach out across the aisle here? I guess we could split the difference, right? In some really bizarre way. But sometimes, it's. I mean, my bias. I kind of think that we should split up. I think it's kind of.
Yeah. So I understand your point. So can I respond?
Sure.
So you're right. You cannot always reach across the aisle. And this is not the end in itself. Again, I agree with you on this. And I agree with you that despite this, even under Trump, and we continue to do this under Biden, we still have a pretty good non-partisan legislation on some topics, right? And not only support for Israel, support for Ukraine also was bipartisan. and many other good bills, infrastructure bill and so on. So we can do this when we have some convergence of interests. But now, what is the value? Why it is important to have? I would actually, I would say, not even to have bipartisan legislation, but bipartisan process of developing legislation. And the reason for this is I refer you to this blind man trying to make sense of an elephant. No single party, no single member of Congress, no single faction of a party does not have the truth. They don't have the capacity to understand the complexity of all these issues that we are trying to solve. They have to talk to each other just in order to understand what the heck it is, let alone to develop the solutions. That's why it is so important. It's not always like splitting the difference, but it's really about creating a better legislation, better laws that would be popular, that would be supported. And so the next administration would not try to repeal them and would not be able to repeal them. This is what this is about. And something else. It was something else and something important, but I lost it. So maybe I'll get
I mean,
back.
I don't know if you realize it, but what you're describing is actually slightly condescending. You know, you're saying, "Oh, we're just stupid people who can't see the whole elephant."
I apply this to everyone, including myself.
I know.
It's not like that someone is not smart enough.
I know
We
that, but
all are
I
not
think humanity never could see the whole elephant and never will. What we do have, though, is interests that we do understand, or at least think we understand, and that's what and you mentioned the word interest, right? So
Yes.
I often hear that, oh, the Trump supporters, they were just duped. Have you heard that?
Excuse me. We're on a kind of a time limit here.
Oh, sorry.
I got two more people with their hands up, and then I'm gonna end it here because we've got to get ready to leave.
Okay.
It's an interesting conversation, so please continue. But in the meantime, Helen, I see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, way back, I don't know, several slides back, there was something about liberal democracy and CRT, DEI. The problem with saying a liberal is that, well, it's the liberal people who misinterpret CRT because they think that anybody who is concerned about racial problems is teaching critical race theory at a level where it isn't being taught. That is a master's level elementary school. No, just because they're talking about Project 1619 or any of that. I don't. It's really a lot of this is. I mean, I'm not going criticizing what you're saying, Michael. It's just the way it was presented or listed just to summarize various viewpoints that are polarizing the country, because DEI is on the other side. It's people like DeSantis are saying anybody who is supporting blacks is woke or something bad, making it look so bad. That's all. That's just an observation of the way it's expressed on the slide. That's all. Thank you.
Actually, an interesting thing that what I noticed that I participated in many discussions around this issue in Braver Angels and others, and people who openly support, say, CRT in its entirety, they rarely appear in these conversations.
Mhm.
I don't know why. I would be really interested to have a good discussion with them.
Yeah.
Although I was a part of this melee, so I know the mindset, but still it's evolving, right? And people are changing. But why I call this illiberal, I actually gave a reference, a link to definition of illiberal. So CRT is illiberal in one sense, that it embraces the notion of collective guilt and collective responsibility. And this goes contrary to liberal ideas of individual responsibility and individual rights and so on. But this does not mean that they had everything wrong. So they got something right.
Yeah, a liberal interpretation of CRT, I guess, versus a better one, which is DEI in a way, but not that they're equal, but similar. Or two sides, not quite two sides of a coin, but similar. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, before I pass it on, I do want to point out that you will be speaking again next week, won't you, Michael?
Yes, I forgot to mention this. That of course some of this is related to what is going on with our elections, right? So the next forum would be specifically about elections.
Okay.
What Democrats have to do to win elections.
Okay, so I'll pass this on to Oded, and we're going to walk away and get ready for lunch shortly. So, Greg, are you prepared to handle questions and answers?
Yes, I can keep the discussion going a little longer if people want to continue.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Michael.
Is the recording over?
We're still recording.
We're still recording.
Well,
And why should we stop recording?
Okay, Oded, you're on.
Yeah, I continue with the same idea about external. If you read the book by George Orwell, 1984, to keep a country together, they need to have an enemy. That means one of the classical tools for putting a nation together is creating an enemy, whether a real or artificial. I don't see any effort to define who is the enemy of America. Iran have the West is the enemy. So many other countries define an enemy to keep the country together. Why does America don't do it? Thank you.
That's a good question. So it's universal. It's not only American feature. So people are best united when they have a common enemy. Unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know. But for America, it's not even obvious who are the enemies. So it's either more than one or none of them. But there are many situations when it's hard to draw the line. For instance, China is apparently a competitor, right? Apparently, we have some clash in our interests, but we also have many common interests and have interdependencies. So Trump tends to take more aggressive stand against China, and it's easy to rally around this, but I'm not sure that this is really productive.
Yeah, I think what happened, 1 second. In the past, America was the stronger country in America, so there was not enemy. Today, America is not the strongest country in America. Therefore, the enemy come up. And this we have to realize a new reality, that America cannot say something and the world say yes. We are not the strongest anymore. And therefore, maybe you can use this tool to keep us together, so maybe strong again. I'm not Trumpist, sorry. But if America be together, we'll become stronger.
Yes, of course.
So we have the goal, and somebody have to convince us that this is the goal, to be the strongest country in the world, so we don't have enemy, so we can live in peace. Why we don't do it? Nobody talking about it.
And I think this is one of Trump's appeals. This idea of make America great again, a part of this is make America strong again, like the leader of the world. And maybe it's not necessarily a bad idea by itself, but is it possible in modern world for any one country to be unconditionally stronger than anyone else? I'm not sure. So economically, China is going to overcome us. There are very few doubts about this. Militarily, we don't know yet, but it's also a possibility. So I think the better goal would be to be well respected player in the world, authoritative, who people would listen to us, not only because we are strong, but because we are right in some issues, because we are helpful, because we have the right policies, maybe, or the right proposals for the policies. So it's the whole notion of soft power. This I think that we don't appreciate it fully.